Ever have a question about your cunt that you Ever have a question about your cunt that you were too embarrassed to pose? Like, if I don't have sex for the next 8 years, will my pussy hole close? Well, buckle up, school's in session. These sex pros have planned a lesson, 'cause cunts aren't just for reproduction. Whether you were born with it or it's under construction, open your ears, 'cause the Clam Jam's got you covered. The Clam Jam.
Hello, and welcome to the Clam Jam. We just had a weird technical difficulty on our end, but I think on your end, everything went well. I'm Vienna, I'm the consultant, and today we are going to be joined by Erin Panichkul of the organization If, When, How. This is like one of our, I'm sure, ongoing many conversations around abortion and reproductive justice and reproductive rights. So today is Thursday, January 21st. We were just talking about how we are living in a new administration now in the US. And perhaps we'll talk about how that might impact reproductive justice and reproductive rights going forward. In some ways it does. In some ways it doesn't at all, I'm sure. But mostly I'm just excited to bring Erin on and talk more about the legal and organizing side of what happens when it comes for reproductive rights. I think oftentimes I have had conversations with people, especially on the person-to-person level. So how do we access abortion? How do we get our needs met in that system? How do we access any kind of reproductive care? But less so, I don't really hear as much from lawyers or from people who are organizing the lawyers. So again, we're gonna hear all about it from Erin. I met Erin actually a few years ago now at a Roe v. Wade anniversary celebration breakfast here in San Diego. And she introduced me to the Coalition for Reproductive Justice in San Diego and all kinds of great things. And it was just a really lovely meeting, and Erin was so gracious and just lovely to talk to and so nice to me personally. And I was just like enthralled with everything she was doing on the legal end of all these things. So she's going to come on and talk all about the work that she's been doing. And if you don't know about If, When, How, If, When, How is an organization. I'm going to read from their website. They transform the law and policy landscape through advocacy, support, and organizing, so all people have the power to determine if, when, and how to define, create, and sustain families with dignity and to actualize sexual and reproductive well-being on their own terms. So an amazing organization. And then what Erin does specifically is she is the senior student organizing coordinator. So this is like, we're going to be looking at it from what is it like to, one, like be on the legal end, but what is it like to teach the next generation of lawyers, like why reproductive justice is important, what reproductive justice is, and how they can be involved. So Erin is, of course, the professional expert on all this. So I'm going to bring her on now. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you so much for having me, Vienna. And what an intro. I feel so honored.
So good to have you.
Thank you. So like Vienna said, I'm Erin Panichkul. I'm the Senior Student Organizing Coordinator at If, When, How. I'm based, my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm based out of Oakland, California. Our org has been remote for about 2 years. So we have folks all over the country in DC, Texas, Arizona, Washington, and all over California.
Wow.
So I am what you would call a non-traditional lawyer. I train our law student network at If, When, How to be reproductive justice advocates and to spread reproductive justice on their campuses and in their communities nationwide. We have about 100 chapters at law schools in the US and also one in Canada. So that's pretty exciting.
Wow.
Yeah, so I train and I mobilize folks. They are student organizations. Like if you think of like student groups on campus in undergrad and like law school, that's what we're doing. And they're connected with us at the national office. So if I could just share my If One House story, actually is pretty full circle. Yeah, thank you.
All the way back to the beginning.
So when I was in law school, I actually had no idea what I was doing, like most people. In my first year, I discovered If One How. Back then, it was called Law Students for Reproductive Justice. We merged and became If One How Lawyering for Reproductive Justice probably like 4 years ago now. 5? I'm not even sure. It was a little bit before I joined the team. But when I found Law Students for Reproductive Justice, I totally knew this was my jam. And I was just so grateful because outside of that, I just couldn't connect with law school or lawyering very much. I just knew that's where I was because I didn't know what I was going to do after undergrad, and it sounded pretty cool. So I got involved. I interned at the national office my first summer and got really well connected to the other student chapters as an organizer myself. And then fast forward a few years, and I've been here with If and How for 3 years now, training the law student network that I was once a part of. It's just warms my heart. I love to share that story because it's true and it's real, and I hope it shows how much I love our work.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely full circle of like coming in and being on all sides of it now, right? You were the student, and then now you're like organizing the students. So that's definitely, I think, reflects very highly on the organization as well. I was just looking at your bio, though. You have done a lot of things. So even when you were in law school, you were working with the Students for Reproductive Justice, and then also with the ACLU. You were doing you were working on mass incarceration, physicians for reproductive health, all these things. So, I mean, clearly this has been a passion for you for a while. So I don't know how all those other facets, I mean, I can see how they can all connect, but I don't know if is there a way that you feel like they all connect together to where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was a women's studies major at UCLA when I was an undergrad. Really didn't know anything about it. I actually, funny story, I wanted to be a mass communications major when I transferred, which I think is so cool. But my GPA wasn't great, so I was like, let me just pick a smaller kind of major to transfer into. And my first day of class, I was blown away. I had no idea that would lead me to where I am today. It actually makes a lot of sense. I was a women's studies major, but that really opened my eyes to injustice that is still happening, that I feel like we read about and we hear about. But it hadn't occurred to me that there was so much still stigma and so many rights we were still fighting for. And that was 10 years ago when I was just a little baby student walking around UCLA, not knowing what to do. Sorry, you were asking me about how things connect. Is that right?
Yeah, just cause I mean, I think they do connect, right? Even working mass incarceration policy and reproductive justice have I would say a pretty clear through line, right? But I'm curious, if working on one informed working on the other, or if, you would just what led you down those roads, and was it driven by passion or just here's an internship that looks like it would be aligned with another belief of mine?
Yes and yes. So If One How is actually what taught me intersectionality. I mean, I learned the topic in school with my women's studies classes, but I saw it in practice when I was interning at If One How, and I realized that what intersectionality really means is that our lives are multidimensional, and so are our experiences, and so are the ways we experience oppression and also exercise our privileges. And that all the movements work together, and if without working together, no one really makes a lot of progress on their own, right? So I see them very connected. There's no racial justice, there's no reproductive justice without racial justice, and vice versa. But how I branched out in law school was it really came from this urge to do anything I cared about, right? And also selfishly take this as an opportunity to live and travel and intern in a new city. And I was determined to go to New York every summer, and I did. And I was able to land these really cool internships that you mentioned, like one at ACLU doing mass incarceration. I was at the UN working on administrative law. That was very boring. I crossed that off my list immediately. And Physicians for Reproductive Health, which is just a great organization. But I follow just things like, what do I care about? And I definitely want to work in like public interest, justice-oriented fields. And the more I intern, the more I realize that like the foundations really are the same, like, structural inequality, systematic issues that affect like entire communities of people and their ability to thrive, which is the basis of reproductive justice in all the ways too. So I think all of that really informed my experience and why I'm such a big reproductive justice advocate now. It's beyond like reproductive health and rights. It really is. When I think of justice, I think of wage equality, being safe from police brutality. There's so many things going on. And if you don't care about, like, it's hard to do one thing without the other, right? Like, so I think of our 5 strategic initiatives, like at If One How, we work on 5 main concepts. So one is decriminalization of self-managed abortion. Actually, I'll go into all of them, but if I can just name them first. The second one is expanding youth access to abortion. Third is overturning Harris v. McRae. It's a Supreme Court case. Eliminating welfare family caps, and also expanding on birth justice. So all of these things, they're repro health and rights, but also justice related. And with decriminalization of self-managed abortion, that means, we have a law and policy department that works to represent folks who are being prosecuted for terminating their pregnancies. So when SMA is what we call it for short, self-managed abortion, that is any non-clinical abortion. So if folks decide to take the abortion pill at home, or terminate the pregnancy in other ways using like herbs or other remedies, that is what we call self-managed abortion. And it is just, in many states, it's criminalized, and it's awful. But it also, we got to look at who is most impacted and who is being disproportionately charged with those crimes. And that's where we bring in that intersectional approach.
Which, like, I want to pause on this part for a minute. All of it, I want to hear all about it. But that's how I first learned about If One How, was doing some trainings through Molly Dutton Kenny on self-managed abortion. And she was like, if you need like they can't. I mean, she was like, I don't know how much they can do for you, but here's an organization that if you have questions, reach out to them. So If One How has been on my radar for a few years in that regard specifically. And something that comes up, especially like to what you said, it's like if you're not doing an abortion in a clinical setting, either that be you're taking pills. I guess does it also count for like if you got pills from a doctor but you choose to do it at home?
Yes, it's really up to you. How you self-managed abortion can include all of that.
Got it. So yeah, in all these different instances, and especially I'd say like in this moment of being in the midst of a pandemic, more people are probably taking advantage of that option simply because it's harder to access. And then we already know that it's really, really hard to access abortion in this country, even though it's legal. Whether or not it's accessible is another question. And that is a continuous piece of that. So I think it's such an important piece. And the second, or the other part that I wanted to bring up is like with the prevalence of the availability of abortion pills online now. So we know like there's not as like Plan C pills is the number one that I can think of right now in the US, right? They send pills within the US. Do you know? Like Plan C, it's like they will within the US, I believe.
Yes. I don't work with the org specifically, but I follow them on social media, and I believe that's what they do. And they seem really amazing.
And I know, I guess I'm confused because there's like Women on Web, which is another one, which started as Women on Waves, was an organization that would just women believe she was a doctor, she would go around in a boat into international waters and offer abortions for women in countries where it was illegal, in international water. So if they could get on a boat to get to her, they could have an abortion. And then that turned to Women on Web, which then mails abortion pills to people where they need them. But I don't think they mail to the US because it's not actually illegal here, even though it can be highly inaccessible.
That is outside of my world. I'm so sorry. I can't answer that, but
that's I could be wrong. That's my understanding. But then the other part of it with like Plan C pills or order abortion pills online is, to your other point of the decriminalization, where you might be able to get these pills to you, but it's possible that where you live, depending on the state, you could be actually facing criminal charges for managing your abortion at home, for managing your fertility how you see fit in your own home, can and has in some cases, right, led to criminal charges. And in the cases where it has led to criminal charges, my understanding is most of the time it's women of color or people of color who are, of course, disproportionately targeted by that. So it is a topic near and dear to my heart. And so it just like, I think that's something that's lost on people, where it's like, it's legal, abortion is legal. But then there's this other dimension of it. Like if you're not going through a clinic, it actually might be expressly illegal where you live.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You got that right. In fact, I wanted to share that the Supreme Court recently, was it reversed? Okay, sorry. Well, the Trump administration had attempted to limit like abortion pills, like so anyone who was getting abortion pills from their doctor, that they had to go during the pandemic in person to get their prescription. The courts said no, the court said no, and so people were able to get it by mail, just like every other medication they were being prescribed. And the Supreme Court struck that down again. That was very recent. So now, yeah, it's, I want to say like a few weeks. So folks who are being prescribed abortion medication from their doctors are now required to go in person to a pharmacy or a clinic or their hospital in order to pick up that medication, whereas everything else during this pandemic is available by mail. It's awful. And it's just another way of, like, you have to risk your health, and many people are home with children who now have to be who are exclusively virtual learning. And it just adds so many barriers. And the people most affected by that are like low income people of color, disproportionately. So, yeah. But Vienna, you brought up our work at If One How, and we actually have this really cool thing. It's the only helpline of its kind in the entire country. It's called the Repro Legal Helpline. Oh. And I'm so proud of it. My colleagues have done a fabulous job. And so what it is folks can call in from anywhere in the country who have questions about self-managing their abortion, or specifically about the laws in their state. So like if they're considering self-managing their abortion, or if they have, or they want advice about it, we can provide legal advice, or we can provide legal information, not advice, about the laws in that state. And if they need to be connected with someone, whether it's an attorney or other, please, no legal advice. Sorry.
Legal information.
Yes. Yeah, and it's great. It's a resource that's really well used. It's in 3 different languages on our website, and also we have, I believe we work with interpreters as well.
That's incredible. And I think that's such a valuable resource. And thank you for sharing that, because if you are considering that option, it would be good to know what you're stepping into. Because again, I believe, right, I think there was an instance of a woman in Idaho, right, who was accused of having a self-managed abortion. It was unclear. There's the other part of where it's no one really knows if you miscarried or had an abortion. It's very hard medically. It's impossible medically to tell. I'd say maybe there's caveats there, but generally speaking, they're the same thing. And she was accused. She I think disposed of the remains in a trash can, and someone found it, and then she went to jail for that. And it was unclear. She claimed that she had miscarried the whole time, but that's not what the courts ended up saying, and she may still be in jail at this point. And so
I think this person was later charged with like unlawful disposal of a body.
Yeah.
So it's really awful to release folks for terminating their pregnancies in any way. It's already a very personal decision, and it can be difficult for a lot of folks, and people make that decision for a million different reasons, and it's very private. So I think it's a huge invasion of privacy that the government wants to regulate that.
And I think that's such a good point that you bring up as well, because traditionally, if we want to speak like about the history of abortion, which has existed forever, as long as we've been able to reproduce, we have also been aborting or inducing miscarriage or inducing menstruation, or like going back to the original birth control, which was literally infanticide, which is different than abortion. Very different things. But it's been around forever. But it was a private matter up until, kind of this standardization of medicine, at least in the US, right? So when we started to have, we'd leave our homes to see the doctor versus the doctor or the midwife or whoever coming to our homes. And so for a while, midwives would just come to you and help you manage what was happening, or you'd go to like the local herb person or whatever. And it was all very private because it was just, at that time, like women's business, and it was kept within the home. And then we shifted to this model of medicine where you go to a centralized location to have medicine, to access that. And so then abortion, once that becomes legal again in this country, in that 100-year period, right, between like making abortion illegal to Roe v. Wade, which was about 100 years, then we have to leave our homes and have this public interaction in order to access this kind of care, which then, of course, leads to all these things about people protesting or just, the inconvenience, one, and then two, like the actual safety concerns that can arise out of that, both like physical safety as well as like social, emotional, and mental safety. So, yeah. It is an invasion of privacy. And I don't think any of us really end up thinking about it like that unless it's pointed out.
So speaking about abortion rights, I'm not sure if folks know what the Hyde Amendment is. So in 1976, the Hyde Amendment was introduced, and it bars federal or public funding for abortion healthcare. And so if you ever hear, very outdated folks, anti-choicers who like, I don't want my taxpayer money going to, well, it doesn't. It just does not. And we want to change that, actually. So there's a Supreme Court case that is actually part of one of our major strategic initiatives called Harris versus McRae. It is, Harris versus McRae. Yes, it is a Supreme Court case that upheld the Hyde Amendment. So it's, and there was a Supreme Court justice that said, this policy was designed specifically to deprive poor women of the right to bodily autonomy. So it's still in existence today, and there's a big movement to overturn Hyde. So that's something that we're working on, and
that's exciting.
Yeah, there's also this really great, very short documentary called Abortion Helpline. This is Lisa. Not sure if you've heard of it.
No.
The creators are huge If One How folks and If One How supporters, and we're actually going to be hosting a screening of it pretty soon. I believe we're going to do that during Harris v. McRae Visibility Week sometime in March. And awesome. I'll share that with you later, Vienna, and you could share with your listeners. So it's 13 minutes long. It's actually on the short list for an Oscar also. It's really exciting. Very moving 13 minutes. So what it is it follows the experience. It follows these, I believe, 2 or 3 abortion helpline volunteers. So if folks don't know at home that there are abortion funds in every state, and those are nonprofits that help, that accept donations and provide those funds for people seeking abortion care and need funding to like either pay for it or anything related like childcare or transportation or anything like that. So the 13 minutes follows these clinic volunteers, hotline volunteers, and you hear folks calling in asking for financial support, right? They're explaining that like, hey, I need it for X, Y reasons, and it really tugs at my heartstrings because the funds, the helpline, they only have a certain number, like amount that they can allocate per day. So like when folks need support, like it must be so hard to not be able to be like, I'm sorry, we can only provide this much because we also have to provide for another person the same day. It's awful that people are put in positions where they don't, for whatever reason, don't want to carry a pregnancy to term and need an abortion, and they're unable to afford it because it really does force people in situations that are where people have little power and little options. But yeah, it's extremely powerful. And then it goes into like a Henry Hyde, who is the awful founder of this policy, and that is still in effect today. And you see like folks on the Senate floor, like like our congressional representatives arguing for and against it. And like there are amazing reps that are still today fighting for that same right. So yeah, abortion helpline. This is Lisa. Really excited for you all to watch it.
Yeah, that sounds great. I guess the question I have, and maybe you'll explain this as we go into the other pillars, but what would overturning the Hyde Amendment mean? Like, what would I have an idea of what that would mean, and then why it's important. But can you speak a little bit more to that, especially for people who might like have some reservations around, like maybe I don't want my taxpayer dollars going to abortion. Speaking to that, like if that's a feeling that someone has, and also why is this particularly important, and what would it do for our access?
Thanks for asking. So it's really interesting because like in no other health care aspect do people ever regulate or even identify what they wouldn't want their tax money going to. So if it were like, I don't know, like folks who need surgery for their foot, or literally any other yeah, so like any other medical procedure that would be otherwise covered by public insurance is not. So it's kind of silly to pinpoint this specific thing that you don't want to like cover, right?
It also means specifically that like Medicare and cannot be used for abortion, right? That's also part of it. So like military insurance and state funded like Medicare programs cannot be used to pay for abortion. Is that correct? Like, or those forms of insurance will not cover it?
Yes. So like public funds. But it really isn't just like there's this pot of money where like people are pulling from to have abortions. So it's really not like that. The narrative I think is pretty dangerous, right? But it really is just like healthcare coverage, and this is one of the many things that are covered. Let's say like if it were dental, or if it were, like to the extent that public insurance does cover like procedures, like birth control, things like that. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, but yeah, so I keep thinking dental, but let's say you needed a different procedure, like the thing in your appendix. Yeah. Something like that. Like you wouldn't think twice to be like, well, I don't want my tax money going to pay for that person's appendicitis or whatever it's called. And it's really another way to regulate people's bodies and specific people's bodies, because if you think about who relies most on public funding, are low-income folks, right? And not everyone has the luxury of having private insurance that does cover that. So it's extremely costly to be low income if you really think about it, right? So that's another part of like the racial justice component, because when you say you don't want your taxpayer money going to this, it means only the wealthy can make those decisions, or people who are well funded enough to have the private insurance cover. And it really is regulating low income people from like creating the families they want or don't want, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Did I answer your question?
I think so. I guess No, I think you did. Like, just around like why overturning Hyde in particular is an important part of the work that you're doing.
Oh yeah, and so you did ask what that would look like. It would look no different. It would look no different. It would like nothing would change as far as like different policies. It would just be absolutely covered under that same health insurance. So
Right.
The difference would be people can access it again.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I wonder too, and maybe we might be going like too far into the policy department. I know that's not your specialty, but you're very knowledgeable with like things. Because I think when we talk about abortion, we talk about abortion access, people have this idea of like, we are funding slutty teenagers do whatever they want. Like that's, I think, like an idea people have about who's getting abortions. It's like these irresponsible teenage girls specifically who are running amok and not responsible. And perhaps they're also not white. Like maybe that's the image that some people have, whether consciously or unconsciously. But in reality, it's usually people who already have children, are trying to do the best for their children, are not teenagers. They might be teenagers, but they can be like kind of any age, like I think have like 20s, 30s, 40s. So that's one part of it. And then the other side of what it means when abortion is regulated, made legal, criminalized, and then also not funded is I think that tends to go into other procedures that we might not think of like as you made an oops or you made a bad choice and now you have to have an abortion. It's like you maybe had a wanted pregnancy that, there's some kind of fetal abnormality or there's a danger to the mother's life or, something has gone wrong and now we're in the second trimester and we need help. And that's not accessible because we have this idea that late term abortion is a bad thing. Or if you need support for a miscarriage, you might be able to get access to certain kinds of care because it's like maybe it's an abortion. So depending on like the beliefs of the institution that you're falling into or how it's coded. So there are, or even just like other reproductive conditions that you need help with can also be impacted by these laws. That's my understanding. I could be incorrect, but I don't know if you can speak to any of that, like the ways that when we make abortion unfunded by government funding or illegal or criminalized, how does that impact things that you think have nothing to do with abortion?
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I don't even know where to start. Okay, so first off, oh my gosh, I really don't even know where to start. You talked about the slutty teenager, right? Sure, right? Like,
why not?
Who wasn't? And in irrelevant. Hold on. What does it matter, right? Like, the whole point is, do we care about people's having autonomy over their own lives and their own sexual being? Yes. Right. And so we shouldn't regulate how people have sex, who they have sex with, and whether or not to keep a pregnancy to term, right? Like not everyone wants to parent and not everyone wants to parent right now. Right. And the other thing I wanted to bring up is yes, majority of people seeking abortion are actually already parents. And there are exceptions where people in states where abortion is illegal after a certain time. There are exceptions for when there is a fetal anomaly or the pregnant person's life is in danger or anything like that. But I also think it's very dangerous to have conversations around good abortions versus bad abortions, because really when it comes down to it, abortions are private, right? And it really shouldn't matter why, and it really shouldn't matter it shouldn't matter why people do it, but it also shouldn't put pressure on people to explain why they're doing it, or it doesn't have to be this sympathetic abortion. I share my abortion stories all the time. I'm unapologetic about it, and I love sharing it because, one, I'm super proud of it. Best decisions I've ever made, right? And it led me here, right? I know that it's not that I couldn't have done this. It's just that's not the life I wanted when I got pregnant, and I decided to to continue with the plans that I did have, right? And I will be a parent. I can't wait. I really can't wait, but I can wait. Right? So sharing my story is really important because it helps to destigmatize like the idea of abortion and who gets abortions and why. And it also kind of, 1 in 3 people who can get pregnant have abortions. Like this is a really high number. And it's so we all know someone and love someone who's had an abortion, whether they've told you or not. It's just, it is. And actually that's from the National Network of Abortion Funds, right?
I think so. Yeah.
It's such great organizations. I'm pretty sure. Yes. So they have that campaign where everybody loves someone who's had an abortion. It's a great slogan. But I share my story because 1, I was 18 when I had my first abortion. I just had no idea what the fuck I was doing with life. I did not want to be pregnant and made that decision to terminate. And I had a very supportive partner who's still my best friend till to this day. And thank goodness we made that decision because it was right for us, right? How I did it is I went to my local Planned Parenthood, and it was covered under like the state insurance that I had, and I'm in California. That was done. And then my second abortion, I was 24. It was my first year of law school, already freaking out. Because who isn't freaking out in their first year of law school? But particularly so me is because I am a first generation American. So my parents are immigrants from Thailand, and I'm the first in my family to go to law school. In fact, I'm the first lawyer I know, like of our family. And so I didn't have like the same institutional knowledge that a lot of my classmates had. So I was already struggling just to feel like I belonged, and did not want to become a parent then. In fact, it like really derailed my life there for a moment. But or it was about to derail my life for a moment, but it didn't. I decided, and I don't regret it. And I had an abortion because I wanted to have an abortion, and I had an abortion because I didn't want to parent yet. And I share this all the time because people can relate to that. There's so many people that have chosen for the same reason, or identify with me and my identity, or, you know, the struggles of being the first in their family, or being in school, or just whatever it is. It's so important to share that because there's this weird stigma that exists around this particular healthcare, right? Abortion care. And it's, the more we talk about it, the less people will have to be in the dark, right? Maybe so I had supportive friends and family members, and can freely talk about it, and very proudly talk about it. In fact, I am a Planned Parenthood abortion storyteller. My niece, who's 6 years old, 7 now, loves going on YouTube and showing me my video. And so I'm so grateful to have this circle of support. And I know that not everyone does. And people who live in different communities and different cultures and different families may feel really secluded because of this like unnecessary stigma. So back to the point was that I think it's really important to not only talk about like the exceptions, like the rape, or something like the pregnant person's life is in danger, or anything like that. Like it's actually just as important to talk about people needing and wanting abortion because they have decided that, and whether they are a slutty teenager or a lost law student, or both, right?
Could be all of it.
So all of it's valid, and it's odd that it has become like an issue of morality, and I think that has a lot to do with like more conservative religious connections there, which it really I'm not going to go there, but they're different. And I wanted to talk about access. Yeah, I wrote. You said so many great things. So access.
Yeah. Well, just to say, what was I going to say? Well, just to point out too, like our feelings, again, we're both based in the US. and I know I can only speak from that perspective, our feelings on abortion in this country at this moment in 2021 are new feelings about abortion. Like, it has not, for the entire history of this country or of the world or even of Christianity, has abortion been such a contentious issue. It's actually a very new phenomenon in like the last 40 years or so of abortion becoming such like a hot button morality issue. It has not historically been that way. It's a new development, and that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, so it how you feel about having an abortion is really all that matters. It should not be a moral conversation. And the other thing I just wanted to go back to too real quick was just one of our previous guests on the Clam Jam, Samantha Zipporah, kind of like speaks exactly to this conversation that you had with yourself, is you were saying yes to something else. You were like, okay, look, my creative energy that would go to like potentially like maybe having a baby is somewhere else. Like, I'm saying yes to an entirely different life and an entirely different idea that I have for myself. And it's your body and you get to make those decisions. And I also wanted to point out that you are a celebrity, and we haven't even talked about your Planned Parenthood celebrity. So
yeah, well, in my niece's eyes, she's always asking like, what channel are you on? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she means YouTube channel. So like,
but can you just briefly, before you go on, can you just mention the Planned Parenthood feature that you did, like the storytelling? Because you were on a bunch of Planned Parenthood stuff, right? Like you're a Planned Parenthood celebrity.
Sure. Excuse me while I turn really red right now. Yes, I have spoken at like a Supreme Court rally. I've spoken, I think I've spoken at like the event that you and I met at for Planned Parenthood. Basically sharing my abortion story and sharing stories of success, right? And like, it doesn't have to be, for me, my successes came because I chose to have an abortion, right? But like for folks who who had abortions and didn't go to law school, good for you too, right? Like, you don't have to justify like that need to anybody. For me, I like to share it because it allowed me to follow my dream still. And for me personally, I don't know if it would have, I think it would have derailed my plans. And I didn't even fully flesh out my plans yet. I just knew becoming a parent wasn't in my immediate, like.
It's not what you wanted to do.
Yeah, I didn't want to do it. Yeah. And you know, now in my 30s, I'm just like, ooh, I can't wait, you know.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a common sentiment that a lot of people who like have children and have abortions, again, that is the majority of people do it. They know what it takes to have and raise a child. And they know they are not doing that again at this moment for a variety of reasons. And so for me, like I think about that a lot of just like, these are the people who like, if we're making these arguments about like children and who gets to all these things, right? It's like the parents know what this takes and the parents are making these decisions. So I don't know, again, to your also point, like you don't need to justify your abortion. You don't need to justify your reasons for doing so. It is healthcare, it is access to healthcare. It doesn't matter if you have one abortion. It doesn't matter if you have 6. It doesn't matter if you have one child. It doesn't matter if you have 6. None of these things matter. It is like about what you need and what you see in your life and what you want your life to be like. And those are big, big, important choices that only you should be able and allowed to decide and make.
Absolutely.
So I know you have all these other things to say, so go ahead.
I just got so excited. I love talking about my abortion. Yeah, so really it's so important to keep having these conversations, because every single time I go on stage and talk about like my story and my life, someone comes up to me after and says like, thank you. I've had an abortion too, and I've never told anybody. Or thank you, I'm also like my first generation, and I couldn't tell my family, or whatever. Like however they relate, even if it's just, hey, I liked that story, I liked hearing it, and it was empowering and that kind of stuff. To know that if you ever want or need an abortion, you're not alone. And it's just. Every time someone comes talk to me afterward, it reminds me that like it is so powerful and important to continue having conversations and sharing your story, because there's someone somewhere who is thinking and feeling the same thing and feeling quite alone. And the more we have these conversations, the more we like shift the culture of the conversations, and that like one day no one will feel stigmatized, and it will just be healthcare.
as it was and as it should be.
Yeah. And and you know what we should, people who, anti-choicers, and like actually everyone should be really putting our energy into, like better sex education also, and, so to prevent unintended pregnancies, as well as, like celebrating sexuality. Right? Like if it's like a lot of times, especially for like young folks who find themselves like with unintended pregnancies, is like, and like there wasn't enough education around it to really fully understand all of your options and all of that stuff. So people who want to like, in order to decrease the number of unintended pregnancies, we should really, instead of looking at abortion, we should look at the systemic root of like get rid of abstinence only. It's not doing anything for anyone anywhere. Like it's shaming sexuality, and I think that we should be celebrating it.
And I mean, that's a whole other conversation about abstinence only education, which then also tends to go in line with anti-abortion rhetoric and beliefs. And so then not only you're just setting people up for failure, just across the board. Don't have sex and then you won't get pregnant, and then only have sex like under certain circumstances, which is not how the world works. For even if it's like non-consensual sex aside, like that's not how the world works. People have sex for a variety of reasons. Additionally, even if you like use any birth control method, unless you literally do not have a uterus, your uterus has been removed, they all have a chance of failing. So again, this idea of like response, like you're saying, like the good abortion or the responsible thing, it's like you can be doing all the things that you're supposed to do to avoid getting pregnant and having certain kind of sex, like, with sperm and with available eggs. It might happen anyway, because that's just how things happen in these bodies. And if that happens, that's not like, no one should be sentenced to parenting. And that's kind of what we do when we take away access from abortion. It's like, well, your punishment is you have to raise a child, while at the same time saying like having a child is like the greatest thing. Doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
That's me.
I also want to share that, like, when I was 18 and I got pregnant, I wasn't using birth control, or you can call me irresponsible, but I didn't want a parent either. And when I was 24, I was using the NuvaRing. I use it every day. Like, I mean, that's why I was shocked when I was like, hey, my body's changing, my boobs are really big, and I thought, there's no way I could be pregnant. I'm on the NuvaRing. And yeah, you can. So good abortion, bad abortion, there's no such thing, really.
No such thing. No, there's no irresponsibility. It's just you are literally being a human. And this is what humans do.
Like if you ate too much candy, now you have a toothache. Do you want to live with the toothache? You can, right? Or you can fix it, right? Like it's just, yeah. I don't know if that's the best analogy, but I tried there. So back to like reproductive justice and racial justice, and we were talking about access to abortion. So do we have the right to abortion? Yes. But is the right to abortion enough? No. So there's a difference between rights and access, right? So voting rights is a really good example. Everyone, like for folks who are eligible to vote, you have the right to vote. You should be able to vote. Yet we've seen all over the country that there is voter disenfranchisement and voter suppression everywhere, which means accessing that right is difficult for different people and in different places. So imagine you're in a state, Houston, I think it was Houston, that only had one polling station. And Houston is I did not know this, the most diverse city in the country. I visited when I was visiting some chapters, some law student chapters there, and I had no idea. Like, can you imagine this large city only having one polling station?
That's crazy.
By design. It wasn't an accident, right? Like, oh my goodness, how did that happen? No, it's by design, and that's like systematic institutional oppression, right? So like Same thing that goes with abortion. So yeah, we have the right to abortion, but is it actually accessible? Like, so if you can't cast your vote on that day, your right is, it's almost irrelevant to have that right if you can't access the right, right? So same thing with abortion. In many states, there are close to none or none, like no clinics, or let's see, or laws that require dumbass things like a 24-hour waiting period. So let's say you take the day off from work, you are able to get childcare, and you take the bus to this clinic, find out that you're pregnant, let them know you want to have an abortion. They make you wait 24 hours, come back for the procedure. Right. And let's say you can't do it. You can't take another day off of work, or, for whatever reason, you don't have transportation, or, you know what I mean? Or the clinic is like 400 miles away, right? Like, we're lucky that we're in California, where we have a lot more readily access to clinics. And there's a huge network here of folks, and like our abortion fund in California is really like well funded, and that they do a really great job to get people what they need when they need it, including transportation too. But if you were in a different state, like accessing your right to abortion without having access to like a clinic or transportation, or like taking the day off of work, those are just examples of hardship, right? And some folks may have to hide going to the clinic from their family members or a partner for whatever reason, and that makes it very difficult. So the right to abortion is not enough. The right to vote is not enough. We need to make it accessible, and I don't know, we just need to make it accessible for everyone.
Yeah. Well, and I think again, like the work that If When How is doing, and then of course like the work that you're doing too, it's like informing law students of like, you might think again, like abortion is legal. So probably no law student like thinks like abortion is legal, we don't have to worry about it anymore at this point. But this idea of like, there's all these different facets to it, and there's all these like different potential fallouts from the way things are set up. And then If When How, decriminalizing self-managed abortion, because that can mean a bunch of different things, and that might be your only good option that you have, or it's just the option you want to pursue, or it's the only option available to you, all these different things. Because then, right, like there's a whole story in which you try to have you have an abortion, you're self-managing it, it's the option that you chose to use and what's available to you, and then potentially, depending on where you live, you end up in jail, and then that completely derails your life, right? So there's all these, just to like point that out as well. I guess what I'm curious about, if you want to go over, I don't know if you have something else you wanted to add, but I was curious about the additional pillars of If When How. I think you talked about one about ending the cap on welfare families, or I don't think I said that right, but can you go back to that as well?
Yes, thank you for bringing me back. I feel like I could talk about anything or all of this forever. So yes, we do 5. We have 5 strategic initiatives. The first one was decriminalization of self-managed abortion. The second one is expanding youth access. So that is expanding and eliminating judicial bypass for young people to get abortion care that they need. Harris versus McRae, which is overturning, it upheld the Hyde Amendment, and we'd like to get rid of the Hyde Amendment because it restricts funding. And then the last 2 that we didn't get to talk about were birth justice. So that's enhancing people's options for birth justice. So we don't only work on ending pregnancy. We care about all of it, pregnant parenting and not parenting as well. So welfare family caps is the last one. We want to eliminate welfare family caps. And what that is there are certain states that have limitations for like welfare funding. So let's say a family is eligible for welfare support, and they get that funding, and then they have another child, and they're no longer eligible to get funding for that additional child, because essentially the state, it's so deeply rooted in like classism and racism that it essentially says we don't want poor people to continue reproducing, right? And so it's awful because in any other circumstance, you would have additional support for those families. And it really goes back to politicians, like anti-choicers don't want to increase, don't want people to have abortions, but they're also not going to provide any funding or support for people who do have children or have additional children. It's a damned if you do and damned if you don't kind of situation.
It's like that specifically, like that part of it, just there's so many reasons I have for why I feel like America in particular is a very anti-family country, even though we have this idea, or we say that we're the side, family values, right? Like that is a conservative mantra and anti-choice mantra, I think, as well. In that, like, family values, traditional family values, having children is a good thing, yet we don't do things to support people in having children. We make it incredibly difficult for birthing parents and mothers to have children and work. The pandemic is an excellent example of how that's extra highlighted, where your children are at home. You might be the primary caregiver and you're also expected to continue your job. We don't do that. We don't have good childcare options that are funded, that are publicly funded or available for people. Like the pay gap for women who are generally, birthing people in general, usually speaking, right? You also take a hit when you become a parent and then you try to re-enter the workforce for a variety of reasons. If in a traditional situation or in a cis hetero situation, if the mother has a baby, the father is more likely to get a raise and the mother is more likely to get a pay cut, either through indirect things like having to take less hours of work, or just having to take time off to raise the baby, because for a certain period of time, that infant needs that parent in a critical way. So there's all these things that we already set up in this, and this being a prime example of we're not willing to help the most marginalized, poorest people in our country support the children that they have, because we think there's something wrong with you morally if you're poor. And yet we're making it impossible for people to access abortions if they decide that's what they want to do instead. And it just boggles my mind and I do not understand it. And it just, again, adds this narrative of you're not supporting people in having families. You're staying over here, you want people to have families, and then you're doing everything possible to make having a family so hard. And it makes me very angry.
It's so frustrating. It's like they're anti-certain families. It's
it's classist. Yeah. The rich people can continue to have lots of babies. That would be great. There's so many. It's so infuriating. But yeah, that is disgusting, actually, that there are welfare caps for children and families like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's awful, and it still exists. I'm not sure how many states, but our law and policy works on prioritizing that as an issue here as well. It's wild how much these restrictions are actually interconnected. If you think about this is coming back to intersectionality. It's a person's race, class, ethnicity, economic status, and immigration status, and all of these things. It really adds more layers of difficulty the more complex your identity is, right? And everyone's identity is complex because I'm never just a woman. I'm also Thai. I'm also I also have a disability, and I'm also a lawyer. So we're all so many different things in one, and they all of these restrictions affect different people so differently and add layers to it. So if you can imagine someone who is seeking an abortion and is denied because they can't afford it, so that they decide to parent, and then they can't get additional funding, so that they are staying in the cycle of poverty, really. So and then the wealth disparity continues to grow and grow, while minimum wage doesn't.
Yeah.
So
it also points to how there are so many issues that are actually reproductive rights or reproductive justice issues. So minimum wage is actually a reproductive justice issue. The Flint water crisis, like Flint, Michigan, that is a reproductive justice issue because people and children now have like severe like diseases and handicap, or not handicap, but just like there's, I don't know exactly the right word, but there's been a lot of fallout through lead poisoning that has led people to be severely incapacitated. And that is a reproductive justice issue as well.
Yeah. I think of reproductive justice as like being able to holistically, like being like for people's ability to thrive their entire communities, entire identities, and whether that means like increasing wage or getting like citizenship status or being safe from like policing, to accessing higher education, right? All of the above.
Totally. Yeah, it's complicated and complex. I wonder, so I'm interested, I know you had some other notes. There's other things you wanted to bring up, but I'm also curious about you speaking a little bit more towards like how could people, if someone is a lawyer or interested in becoming a lawyer, or they're a student and they'd like to be more involved with If When How what does the organizing that you do on a daily basis look like, and how could people get involved?
Oh my gosh, please reach out to me. I'm so excited for this. So what I do, I train, I mobilize, and I support our law student chapters, right? So each chapter has, an executive board and they have members. I support them on their unique campuses. So some folks are on religiously affiliated campuses, some are starting out brand new, and some are really long-standing, really strong groups. So this is great. I spend a lot of time like strategizing with each chapter to brainstorm ways that they can bring events and fundraisers and lobbying and advocacy work, not just to their campus to spread the ideas and like the beliefs of reproductive justice, but also like how to actually contribute to reproductive justice in their communities and nationwide. So I like to think of it as like I'm planting the seeds and I'm watering the seeds, sorry. So that like the future generation of lawyers are reproductive justice and justice minded and take into account like racial justice and institutional inequalities and systematic inequalities, and take that with them to whatever work they do. So especially if folks aren't going to stay in the repro, like go into repro professionally, it's even better to have advocates, reproductive justice advocates in every branch of government or in every position, all the way from like lawyer to judge, or even if you're working on property law, like to have that reproductive justice, that analytical framework is going to shift this country and the culture and the progress. And I'm so excited. So I want to share that there are some things, just examples of some things our chapters have done. Let's see, for example, there's a Massachusetts chapter that co-sponsored the Roe Act, so legislation in Massachusetts that codified Roe v. Wade, which means it is a state law that abortion is legal until 20 weeks and like protected to 20 weeks. And then expanding on youth access to abortion too. Some folks do like sex ed trivia, like fun things like that, fundraisers for their local bail fund, as well as like the local abortion funds. The Washington College chapter in DC created an incredible toolkit to get ICE off campus. And also, man, they do so much great stuff. And then the Florida State chapter lobbied and testified against like the against the judicial bypass bills in Florida. So judicial bypass, it's actually one of our strategic initiatives, like the youth access part of it. Judicial bypass is the process of which a young person who seeks to have an abortion has to go through the court and ask a judge for permission to bypass it through the courts.
So it's like you have to be a certain age in order to access an abortion. And if you're under that age, you have to have your parents' permission, right? And if not, then you have to go to a judge.
Yes, which is awful and stressful in all types of ways. And it's another like many doors closing for someone who just doesn't want to, who just wants to terminate their pregnancy. So a lot of states have judicial bypass or parental involvement laws. My goodness, a large number of states actually. And so there are a lot of reasons, right? Like that people need to go through judicial bypass. It's actually not just as simple as, my parents won't let me, right? Some folks who have undocumented parents can't authorize or give permission like legally for that. Or let's say like if your grandparent is your caretaker but is not your legal guardian, and so you can't. Or if English is your second language and you don't have like an interpreter or a translator to help, or like if they don't have a great relationship with their family member or their parents, or if they're in an unsafe home. There are a lot of reasons, and this is actually stigmatized a little bit more than I think some folks are not as comfortable with young people having abortions, and then to some extent, like what age that is, people are less and less comfortable. But we believe that young people also have the same rights and autonomy, and know what's best for themselves also, and that we have to respect that. And so we support young people in connecting with, and we connect folks with like lawyers in their state, and provide support in that way. But yes, if you are a law student and interested in becoming a law student or a lawyer, please connect with If When How. You can reach out to me. I'll share my email. But we have a lawyers network, an RJ Lawyers Network, and we have an RJ Law Students Network, which we have a new community online platform that we connect folks with. And there are pro bono projects that we're working on, as well as we host CLE programs for lawyers too. And yeah, just building the network, especially if you don't work in repro and are interested, join us. And my email is erin@ifwhenhow.org. That's ERIN @ifwhenhow. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
I'll link your little profile on the website below, and have that for people available. I don't think we have any questions right now, but perhaps in the future, and I'll bring them to you and we'll find out more. But thank you so much for being here. This was fabulous. It was so great to hear more about the work you're doing. I'm curious if there's anything else like on your mind that you want to get off your chest before we wrap up.
I want to highlight the Repro Legal Helpline again. So, yeah. I mean, check it out because it's a beautiful site. It's a Repro Legal Helpline, and please spread the word for any folks that you know or might need to like access information about abortion and the criminalization laws in their state. It can be a lifeline for folks.
Yeah, I think it's so valuable, and especially I think as time progresses, as this year progresses, as we continue to be living in a pandemic, which probably isn't going away anytime soon. And even though, again, like as we said, like we're under now a Democratic administration in the US, that doesn't necessarily mean anything when it comes to reproductive rights and justice. Like it's definitely like maybe a little bit more hospitable, but this is not work that is now over or that our access to these things is going to be any easier.
Oh, absolutely. Yesterday was the inauguration, and today already just personally feels like a better, lighter day. I can't describe the feeling. It just feels like a sign of relief. And I know that all our problems are not solved in one day, and it's not going to be solved by this administration alone. But it is great news that we've lost the power of the Supreme Court. We're in the minority of the Supreme Court, but that does mean that we have a lot of power in Congress and now with the presidency. So we're going to keep up all of our work and continue to pressure for like new legislation and policy, not just to be reactive, but proactive in taking steps forward too, because I think we hit a lot of blows in the last, I don't even know, it feels like a million years. But it's now we want to take back that and continue to expand resources and access and options for all folks to be able to thrive.
Yeah, it's there's always something to be done,
And I'm hopeful.
And there's hope, and there's so much hope, especially thanks to the things you are doing. So thank you so much, Erin. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing about your personal stories and then the work you're doing. I'm gonna find your Planned Parenthood thing, because I'd like to link that as well. Again, Planned Parenthood celebrity. That's what I'm calling you now. But thank you so much for joining. I'm going to play the outro. If you enjoyed this live stream, let us know. If you enjoyed this conversation, or if you have questions on any of these topics, feel free to reach out. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Your cunt is special, there's so much to love. You and your pussy should fit like hand in glove. Whether it belongs to you or your lover, there is so much to discover. See you next time, the Clam Jam's got you covered. The Clam Jam.